Yeah, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure and an honor for me to be invited here to talk to you about that, and hopefully afterwards also with you. I also want to say that this is the first time that we make a formal presentation on this brand new document, GLSP. It is not yet formally released, Good Lay Summary Practice, but we are in a final process now. And therefore, I think here in this round, I'm happy to share with you where we have come from and what we are going to propose here now to be implemented. Now, first of all, I want to make very clear that in the 2 years that we have now worked on this topic, it became very clear that it is not going to be easy, and it is not going to be immediately involved and easily to follow and integrate, because we have a couple of things that are missing. And so before I want to show you my presentation, I would like to give you a couple of comments that we need to keep in mind here. First of all, we need to be aware that for a researcher, a project nowadays, in the vast majority of cases, ends with the fact that he makes a publication, submits a manuscript, and then the research project is finished. And also for that maximum, for that period of time, he has received funding. What we are implementing now, or need to implement now, is the next step, which is the communication about the research project to the public and to the participants. And this is neither in the mindset of the researchers an essential part of the project, but it is perhaps an add-on and goodwill and own personal initiative, but it is not an integral part of the project, as we have learned that a protocol is part of the project and a final report or a publication is part of the project. So we need to put that into every researcher's mind, that the task is not done with a publication yet. That is the first thing. Secondly, I think we have to be very clear about the differences in need. We are not yet, nowhere, in a situation where we can reliably inform the participants about their individual results. The only thing that we can achieve at this stage is informing participants, hopefully as well and reliably enough, about the overall results of the project in which they are participated. That is already a big step forward, but it's not necessarily what a lot of patients would expect when they hear about return of results to patients as a buzzword. So I think we have to also manage here the expectations and be very clear what we want to do. So by developing now an infrastructure and an environment for returning overall trial results to patients, we will be able to find ways how to reliably do that, because there is lots of criticism as well that this cannot be done well, that there is promotion. I mean, industry especially is always in the suspicion of wanting to promote their results, but also academic researchers want to promote their results. So how to take out this personal interest is one thing, and how to make sure that the quality and objectivity of the information that we give to the patients and to the public at large is really ensured. And when we think about publications, we have in the last 20 years or so or longer developed the peer review mechanism, where the community and the organizations which were practically and concretely involved in publishing have created a certain type of list of requirements and a check that these requirements are fulfilled. When we now start to release lay summaries, there's absolutely no infrastructure then other than the community as such, that they will be okay, that they will be right, that they will be of good quality, etc. So we have still here a long way to go to make this a well-organized, well-functioning and reliable overall process, but we need to start somewhere. And this is what I would like to present you now here quickly, where we have been and what we try to do. And I try now to find my presentation. Lay summaries. In a nutshell, we need to find a way to fulfill our ethical and societal obligation to inform the patients and the participants and the public about the research in which they were involved, in which also public money has been flowing. So we have to make sure that this is going to work. And so far, we have not done this reliably, so we need to improve something. As already mentioned, the clinical trial regulation, which, as we have now heard, will really come into force end of this year, beginning of next year, requires that a lay summary is presented or prepared in parallel to the final report summaries and uploaded into the new European clinical trial database, the CTIS or CTIS, within 12 months after the end of the trial, which is usually last patient, last visit, and in pediatric studies within 6 months. So we have here a new requirement by this regulation, and in addition, a very, very short timeline to prepare that. The fairness of access to information for all patients and the general public is what we need to achieve. So we also have to take into consideration all patients and fair access. And this is technically, physically, logistically not necessarily easy to achieve. Now, one of the limitations is that this clinical trial regulation is only applying to clinical trials with medicinal products in the EU. And also those trials are going to be reported and uploaded the results in the CTIS database. All other types of trials that are with medical devices or other research projects, and also trials that are not taking place in Europe, are not subject to being communicated publicly via the CTIS system. So we have here already a divide between patients in the EU and patients outside the EU. Now, somewhere we needed to start, and there have been 2 conferences in 2015 and 2017 on this topic, and as a result, FPI and EFGZP have taken up the task from that last conference in 2017 to try with a roadmap initiative to get as many different stakeholders together and make sure that we find a way to develop and disseminate lay summaries in a way that is, on one hand, acceptable to all parties involved, and make sure that patients get actively involved in the process of from planning to dissemination as equal partners to the researchers. So we have now this regulation in place, and the European Commission has created a group of representatives from competent authorities and ethics committees in all EU countries. They are working together in this EU clinical trial expert group called CTEC, and CTEC is implemented to facilitate different aspects that have now been initiated by the clinical trial regulation to get implemented. So we have put or we have submitted our draft versions of the document that we developed to CTEC and have asked them whether they would be interested to work with us on this and to take that ultimately as an official document of the European Commission under their belt, so to say, and they have agreed to that, and we hope very much that next month they will make the final decision on the pre-final text that we have now submitted. Now, this CTEC group has already released summary guidelines or recommendations on the content of lay summaries. That exists already. So they have principal recommendations, and then a template with details on the different sections and what and how the information in that section should be explained. That's an excellent document, and we have built our initiative on that and built and went from there. There's also in the US quite some activities already in 2016. The MRCT, academic institution, has developed guidances on lay summary development and dissemination, which they have submitted to the FDA, as we did to the European Commission. But since then, FDA has not agreed to that document. They have not adopted it. So there the discussion is still ongoing. And also Transcelerate, which is a collaboration of the big pharma companies. They have also developed guidances, very pragmatic, very helpful guidances, but meant for big pharmaceutical companies. Now, we have realized in our initiative from the beginning that this cannot be something only for the medical writing departments of big pharma companies, but that we need to find a way that is also doable, acceptable for academic researchers in the academic environment without that infrastructure and without that budget. So we have invited broadly different organizations to join us in this roadmap initiative. And from academia side, it was ECRIN, who was supporting that very strongly. And also here from Switzerland, Heidi Rotitsky was very much involved in that. And we have in these different task forces worked on particularly hot topics. So for example, on how to enable patient involvement, how should the lay summary dissemination occur, what are specific needs of academic lay summaries, what do we do with pediatric lay summaries, etc. So we had over 2 years now different meetings and workshop, and ultimately came now to a pre-final document, which is still a compromise and it can still be further improved, but we also had a big public consultation. And one of the key comments from the publication, public consultation, especially from the academia side, was that the document is much too long, unmanageable, and that we need to find a different structure. So what we have then done and what we have now is a two-part document. It's on one hand a quick guide, which GLSP stands for Good Lay Summary Practice. So a GLSP quick guide, which presents the principles and the general approach. And then the second part is a GLSP handbook with an extended appendix where also individual members of our roadmap initiative had an opportunity to provide their experiences and recommendations as far as they have now these things worked out to be made available in this document. And so key achievements we have now with this is that we made a very clear distinction between what is mandatory, what is a must, what do we have now to do in future in the EU, and what is best practice. We have also tried to compile as much as possible recommendations for pediatric lay summaries. I think personally that one of the most important achievements was that in this document, for the first time, patient involvement is an essential part of the overall process. It's not anymore a nice to have, or it is something that would be desirable, but it is a formal element of the process, which of course created a lot of discussions about resources and ability to do that, and especially on the academic side. And we will certainly have to continue to work on this, but the GLSP formulates it now in such a way that patient involvement should be done ideally in this way, as much as resources allow. So we have built in the possibility to develop here the infrastructure in that aspect and not discourage anybody from trying to start. So these are the two documents, or two parts of the documents I mentioned. And principally, this is the approach to it. We have divided the overall approach in planning, development, translation, and dissemination, and go in the whole document through these 4 different activities. And particularly on the planning, on the patient involvement, we have kept the same structure, but have added the role of patients and their potential involvement in these different steps. as part of this recommendation. We used here the definitions from the UPATI guidance documents where the different patient categories were presented, and use those patient categories to explain where in these processes the respective type of patients would be most helpful or could be really beneficial to integrate. So the content is so that there is an introduction, and then we come to step one, which is the planning. There, the main point, I would say, is the recommendation for the timing. Start early. Start with preparation of the lay summary at the time when you develop the protocol, because there are so many things that you need to take into consideration that are also relevant for the lay summaries afterwards, especially when we talk about the endpoints, because that is one of the big topics. Which endpoints should we describe in this lay summary, keeping in mind that this needs to be short and easy to understand. And this was, in fact, one of the biggest problems to solve, and I come to that later. Also, especially in the academic environment, it's important to start thinking about lay summaries early, because we need to include that in the budgeting and in the funding proposals. We need to think about the stakeholders that we need and how we are going to communicate with them and how to enable patient involvement in concrete terms. Then when we come to the development section of the document, it is important that we are clear about what is required by the clinical trial regulation. There is clear information, but limited information. And in addition to the wording in the clinical trial regulation, we have these existing CTEC recommendations to help us to some degree further. But what we added here then in this GLSP recommendations is talking about the competencies that are required in the lay summary process. And we made clear that this does not mean that these are different people, but that those who are involved in the lay summary preparation should aim at having those competencies at hand, either themselves or through support. Then we have some additional recommendations in the writing concerning considerations of the health literacy principles, pediatric cognitive development, numeracy, non-promotional language recommendations. So here we have some very practical aspects covered. An important information is also how to present the safety results in a clinical trial. That is not trivial at all. And then altogether also how to approach layout for adult and pediatric studies and how to do review and user testing. A very controversial topic is translation. When we think about fair access to the information, then we have to ensure translation, but that is again a resource issue and also really not trivial. So we give here recommendations how it should be done, but this is really part of the dissemination strategy of a sponsor to figure out how to handle that in an acceptable and meaningful way. And as you can imagine, dissemination, the last step, is a big issue, because the European Commission or the regulator is very worried about misusing this tool for promotional purposes. And therefore, there is in fact a very clear understanding that this CTIS, this new database, which is publicly available, should be the central place for patients and the public to get that information. Now, as we can assume, first of all, this is a huge database and will not be easy to understand and maneuver, and it will not be easy to find the information. And it is not a personal approach. So the Commission is, with their preferred option, is everything goes into CTIS, and that is the place. And you promote as a sponsor that the information is located there and everybody has access to that and can look it up there if they're interested. But it's not so easy because we also have the need between physician and patients, for example, to give feedback on the information. So the next preferred option for the Commission is direct, so-called direct dissemination. And for that, we have, of course, different methodologies and technologies that we can do. So it is just paper and handing over the patient the final, let's say, the lay summary at the end, or sending an email later on, etc. But there are many logistic issues because these lay summaries will be disseminated in many cases months, years after the individual patient has left the trial. So the contact between the investigator and the patient may not be there anymore. They may have lost sight of each other, etc. So there are many difficulties that make a direct dissemination unreliable. And therefore, there is a big interest in many sponsors to use also indirect dissemination, meaning through websites. But the Commission has big hesitations on that. Now, the compromise that we could find with them was that the indirect dissemination would be acceptable if there is a policy in place or SOPs in the sponsor organization in place that all trials from that sponsor are going to be disseminated in this indirect way to avoid that there is any cherry picking of certain studies that are presented in lay summaries and disseminated and others not. So that is really still a hot topic that we are discussing about. And then you have the appendix with really a lot of very interesting and helpful additional information. So the hot topics, as I mentioned, with the discussion with the CTEC are still the direct dissemination versus the indirect dissemination, and this need to ensure that all interventional clinical trials are really then disseminated in the once chosen approach. The other point that we are still heavily in discussions, or hopefully have now come to a conclusion, is the discussion about the endpoints. And there is no dispute about the need to present the primary endpoint. The dispute is about the secondary endpoints because, of course, secondary endpoints make the document longer. It is a discussion whether it is helpful for patients to learn about secondary endpoints, but the patient community has made a very strong plea to also include the secondary endpoints because there is quite often really interesting further information that they would want to have. The clinical trial regulation doesn't say anything about this. CTEC, the existing recommendations say that it should be the primary endpoint really boldly, and only that potentially if there are secondary endpoints that would need to be presented, that would need to be very carefully thought through. But there is a question and answer document from EMA which takes a position to this question, and there it is said that the overall results as requested by the clinical trial regulation reflect at a minimum the primary endpoint and patient-relevant secondary endpoints. And here the discussion starts, what is patient-relevant secondary endpoints? So we have here a wide open door to cherry picking again, and we have not yet found a clear solution how we will be able to give here more clarity and more guidance what patient-relevant secondary endpoints can be. Another topic is interim results, because there are, especially in long-term trials or in our new complex trials where we have different parts of the protocol that are finished at different time points, we have more and more issues of a need to communicate interim results. But the CTIS, the database, does not allow for more than one lay summary upload at the end of the trial. So the question is, how are we going to handle interim results that are so important that the sponsor is either requested by EMA or finds itself that this is so important that the interim results get uploaded, so are publicly available in CITES, but there is no lay summary accompanied with it. So it would be encouraging to say, okay, we recommend that there is a lay summary then also made for those important interim results, but how to disseminate them, that is not really something that is cleared. It can only be done on behalf of the sponsor. So also here, the sponsor would need to prepare upfront a policy, not knowing yet the results of the interim results, to ensure that we get objectivity in the reporting situation here as well. So the questions that I see for Switzerland is, first of all, will Switzerland also make lay summary preparation obligatory? And if yes, for which type of trials? Also only for drug trials and some type of medical device trials, or for all type of research? Will Switzerland adopt the GLSP recommendations once they have been released in the EU? And how will you handle in Switzerland the dissemination? As I don't know if CTIS is going to be acceptable or is going to be a tool here in Switzerland. Is there any other place that is centrally accessible in Switzerland? How will you handle the needs for translation? You have a lot of experience with translations, so how will that be done here? How will you inform patients about the availability of lay summaries? And as of when will you start to request that lay summaries are produced? How will you educate academic and industry sponsors about the new process and their obligation? And how will Switzerland manage to include the need for an additional budget for lay summary preparation and dissemination for public funding processes in Switzerland? I guess this is more than enough topics for a full day, but I apologize for that. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.